did you realize being nice wasn't working anymore? Last weekend, I received a call that there was a chemical emergency at my daughter's special needs swim program. By the time I arrived, paramedics were carrying my 8-year-old Satie out on a stretcher, her body covered in vicious chemical burns and scabs. At the time, I was so panicked that I didn't even notice how she was the only kid who got seriously hurt, whilst every other kid was practically left untouched. Maybe some red eyes and a slight cough, but that's it. Before the ambulance even reached the hospital, her throat began swelling to twice its normal size. She started turning blue. The doctors left me waiting for hours. When they finally came out, they led me to a private room. Satie might never speak again. The chemical burns on her throat were so severe that without surgery in the next 72 hours, the damage would be permanent. When they showed me the burn patterns on her wrists and ankles, they looked exactly like grip marks, like someone held her under. But my Satie has Down syndrome, so she couldn't tell me what happened. I demanded answers from the nurse. That's when she mentioned that Malik, the swim instructor, told them Satie panicked during the evacuation and went under for a few seconds. The next morning, while I was still at Satie's bedside, my phone rang. Insurance company. Our claim was denied. The woman on the phone said I had 48 hours to appeal with proof it wasn't Satie's fault. I started with the other parents. In the hospital parking lot, I recognized Lena from the swim class. When I asked her about the incident, she pulled me aside. Malik always takes Satie away for special attention while our kids stay in the group. Says she needs one-on-one work in the equipment room. My stomach turned. Lena gave me the number and address of someone who used to work at the pool. Said she quit last month. I drove straight there. She wouldn't let me in but spoke through the cracked door. That equipment room Malik uses? He calls it his training space. No one else is allowed in when he has kids in there. Slam. She locked the door after that. 36 hours left. I drove straight to the pool. Malik was in the lobby talking to parents like nothing happened. When he saw me, his face tightened. I approached calmly. Please, I just need to know what happened. My daughter might never speak again. He looked at me with disgust. Maybe if you'd taught her to listen better, she wouldn't panic like an animal. Then more quietly, he mumbled. Not my fault that our word can't follow simple instructions. Before I could respond, a man in a suit appeared from the office. Miss Lally? I'm the pool's attorney. He handed me papers. This is a restraining order. Effective tomorrow morning. Come near this facility or Mr. Malik again and you'll be arrested. That evening, with less than 24 hours before Satie's surgery deadline, I went to the police station. I laid out everything. The grip pattern burns, the locked equipment room, Malik taking kids alone. The desk sergeant seemed concerned, taking notes, until I mentioned Malik's name. His whole demeanor changed. Let me get my captain. I recognized him from the photos in the lobby. It was Malik's cousin. My nephew's been teaching special needs kids for 15 years. Never had a single complaint. He actually hung Malik's employee awards back on his wall while talking. Maybe this is nature's way of telling you some kids aren't meant to speak. Stop wasting police time. I left the station shaking. 18 hours left. That night at the hospital, I watched Satie's burned hands move weakly against the sheets. She was trying to sign through the bandages. Hurt. Man hurt. Room. Bad room. 12 hours left. Time to go nuclear. I called my brother Luke from the hospital parking lot. Told him everything. When I finished, he simply said, I'll call Danny. We met in Luke's garage an hour later. I showed them the photos the doctor had taken of Satie's burns. The pattern was undeniable. Someone held her underwater in concentrated chemicals. They studied the pictures in silence. Danny, who'd done 5 years in juvie for arson, was the first to speak. What do you need? At 2 a.m., we were outside Malik's apartment complex. All 3 of us in black. Luke picked the lock to Malik's unit in under a minute. Malik woke up to find himself zip-tied to his bathtub. 3 figures in black standing over him. He recognized my voice instantly. You held my daughter underwater. You burned her. Now you're going to tell me what you've been doing to her in that equipment room. The bathtub started filling with water. His muffled screams meant nothing to us. Those special breathing exercises you've been giving Satie, the ones that required a locked door, what were they really? I grabbed his hair. I'll give you the same amount of time to answer that you gave my daughter to breathe. His head went toward the water. Just inches from the surface, he started thrashing violently. Please, please, I'll tell you everything. Danny pulled him back up and Malik gasped for air, water dripping from his face as he started babbling about the breathing exercises he'd been doing with Satie for the past 4 months. His words came out fast and jumbled as he explained how he'd take her into that locked equipment room every Tuesday and Thursday after the other kids left. Luke held up his phone, recording everything while Danny kept Malik's head positioned just inches above the waterline. Malik's voice shook as he described making Satie hold her breath while he counted, pushing her limits each time to build what he called endurance. He said she never liked it, always tried to pull away, but he'd grip her wrists tight and tell her it was for her own good. The more he talked, the sicker I felt, watching this man confess to systematically torturing my baby girl week after week. He admitted that during the chemical incident, Satie had fought harder than she ever had before when he tried to do the breathing exercise in the contaminated water. His voice cracked as he described how she thrashed and kicked, how he had to hold her down with both hands on her shoulders to keep her under. She wouldn't stop struggling, he said, so he held her longer than usual, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 40. He couldn't remember exactly because she was fighting so hard. My hands clenched into fists as I listened to him describe my daughter's desperate fight for air while he pressed her underwater in burning chemicals. Luke's jaw tightened, but he kept the phone steady, making sure we got every word. Malik started crying now, snot mixing with the water on his face as he begged us to understand that he thought he was helping these kids get stronger. Danny yanked Malik's head back by his hair and told him to give us the access code to the equipment room at the pool. Malik immediately rattled off the numbers, 47291, and told us about the key to his personal locker hidden behind the third tile from the left in the men's changing room. He said everything was in there, his training logs, his notes about each kid, everything we'd need to understand his methods. Danny looked at Luke, who nodded, then used more zip ties to secure Malik to the shower curtain rod instead of the tub, leaving him standing on his tiptoes with his arms stretched above his head. While Danny made sure Malik couldn't escape, Luke started searching the apartment, pulling out drawers and checking closets for anything related to the pool or the kids. I stood guard at the window, watching the empty street below while my hands shook from adrenaline and rage. Luke found it in the bedroom closet, a black notebook tucked behind some old swimming trophies. He brought it to the bathroom and flipped through pages filled with dates, initials, and notes about different children's progress. There were entries going back 3 years, dozens of kids tracked with careful detail about their breathing times and resistance levels. My stomach turned when I saw SL repeated over and over in recent months with notes like, still resisting, and needs more work on compliance. Luke photographed every single page with his phone, while sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, making my heart race faster with each passing second. Before we left, I leaned close to Malik's tear-streaked face and told him in a low voice that if he ever reported this night or came within 100 feet of my daughter again, we'd send the recording to every parent in the swim program. I explained how they'd all know exactly what he'd been doing to their children in that locked room. Danny added that guys in prison had special ways of dealing with people who hurt kids with disabilities, and Malik's sobbing turned into full body shakes. We left him there, zip-tied to his shower rod, and walked out into the dark morning without looking back. Luke insisted we drive separately to avoid being connected if anyone saw the vehicles, so I followed his taillights through empty streets to his house on the other side of town. Once inside his garage with the door closed, we huddled around his phone and listened to the full recording, Malik's voice echoing in the concrete space as he confessed to everything. The reality of what we'd just done started sinking in as we heard our own voices threatening him, Danny talking about the water, the sound of Malik choking and begging. We had enough to destroy Malik completely, but we'd also recorded ourselves committing serious crimes that could send us all to prison for years. Luke looked at me and said we needed to be smart about this, that we couldn't just hand it to the cops after what we'd done. Danny agreed, saying we should keep it as insurance but find another way to nail Malik legally. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but when I thought about Satie's burned throat, about her trying to sign through bandages that she was hurt, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single second of what we'd done to that monster. By 4 a.m., I was back at the hospital, walking through the quiet hallways toward Satie's room, when a woman in a navy blazer approached me. She introduced herself as Joanna Hart, a social worker who'd been assigned to help with our insurance appeal after someone called in a concern about potential abuse. She had kind eyes and a folder thick with papers, and she mentioned there was an expedited process for cases where abuse was suspected that could get approval within hours instead of days. I wondered who had called her, maybe Lena or one of the other parents, but I didn't care because this was the first real help anyone had offered. Joanna sat with me in the family lounge and helped me fill out new forms, explaining each section and making sure I included every detail about Satie's injuries and the circumstances. She promised to personally walk the paperwork through the system that morning, calling supervisors and pushing for immediate review. She also scheduled us to meet with Dr. Melanie Sumner, supposedly the best ENT surgeon in the state, who had agreed to review Satie's case right away despite her packed schedule. When Dr. Sumner arrived 2 hours later, she went straight to examining Satie with gentle hands and specialized equipment. After 20 minutes of careful assessment, she came out to tell me we couldn't wait any longer because the scarring was already beginning to form. She said Satie needed surgery within the next 6 hours, or the damage to her vocal cords would be permanent, leaving her unable to speak clearly for the rest of her life. Dr. Sumner promised to document everything meticulously during the surgery, taking photographs and measurements that would be crucial for both medical treatment and any legal proceedings. My hands trembled as I signed consent form after consent form, each signature feeling like a prayer that this would save my daughter's voice. While nurses prepped Satie for surgery, wheeling her toward pre-op on a gurney that looked too big for her small body, my phone buzzed with a text from Luke. He said he and Danny were going to the pool tonight to get into that equipment room and document whatever Malik had been hiding in there. I texted back that it was too dangerous, that security would be increased after the incident, but Luke replied that Danny knew how to disable alarm systems from his time in juvie, and they were going regardless of the risk. I couldn't stop them even if I wanted to, and honestly, part of me was glad they were doing something while I sat useless in this waiting room. The surgical floor was too quiet at this hour, and every sound made me jump thinking it was news about Satie. Joanna showed up 20 minutes later with a stack of papers and her phone already pressed to her ear, talking to someone about expedited appeals. She pointed at the coffee machine and I shook my head because my stomach was already churning from the 3 cups I'd had since we got here. The clock on the wall moved so slow I swear it was broken, but every time I checked my phone, only minutes had passed since they wheeled Satie away. Joanna hung up and started dialing another number immediately, while scribbling notes on a legal pad about medical necessity and emergency circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from Luke, just a simple, "We're in," and my hands started shaking worse than before. I walked to the window and stared at the parking lot, trying not to think about what would happen if they got caught breaking into a public building. Another text came through this time, a photo of rows of chemical bottles stacked on metal shelves with labels I couldn't read clearly on my phone screen. The next photo showed a blue mat with dark stains that looked like someone had been sick on it repeatedly. Then came a picture of a locked metal cabinet with a heavy padlock that Luke said they couldn't get open without making too much noise. Joanna touched my shoulder and asked if I was okay, but I just showed her the photos without explaining where they came from. She studied them for a second, then went back to her calls this time, leaving a message for someone's supervisor about a child abuse case requiring immediate insurance authorization. More photos came through showing buckets with handwritten labels that said, "training water," and "advanced breathing mix," which made no sense for a regular swimming pool. Luke texted that Danny was taking water samples from each bucket using bottles he'd brought in his backpack. Then suddenly the messages stopped for 5 whole minutes, and I thought I might throw up from the stress. When my phone finally buzzed again, it was Luke saying the alarm went off and they had to run, but they got out clean with the samples and something else. The something else turned out to be a spiral notebook they'd grabbed from a desk drawer that had dates and chemical formulas written in what looked like Malik's handwriting. Danny sent a photo of one page showing calculations for chlorine concentrations that were way higher than normal pool levels, with notes about building tolerance and pushing limits safely. He recognized some of the chemical names from his time working in the prison kitchen, where they used industrial cleaners, and he said these weren't meant for any pool, especially not one with kids. 3.5 hours after they took Satie back, the OR doors finally opened, and Dr. Sumner walked out still in her surgical scrubs. She pulled off her surgical cap and sat down across from me and Joanna, explaining that the surgery went as well as could be expected, given the extent of the damage. Satie's vocal cords were severely scarred from the chemical burns, and while they'd done their best to repair what they could, recovery would be long and uncertain. She'd taken extensive photographs during the procedure documenting every burn and scar, which she said would be critical evidence if we pursued legal action against whoever did this. The pattern of burns in Satie's throat matched the external grip marks, perfectly confirming someone had forced her head underwater and held it there while she tried to breathe the contaminated water. Dr. Sumner promised to write a detailed surgical report that would make it clear this wasn't an accident or a child panicking, but deliberate harm inflicted by someone stronger. She said Satie would be in recovery for another hour before we could see her, and warned us she'd be groggy and unable to speak for at least a week while the surgical sites healed. After Dr. Sumner left, I called the number Joanna had written down for Veronica Gould, who answered on the second ring, even though it was past 9 at night. I explained everything that had happened from the initial incident to the surgery we'd just finished, and she listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said she could meet with me tomorrow morning, and told me to start documenting every single expense receipt conversation and medical update from this point forward. She asked if I had any evidence beyond the medical records, and I mentioned the photos Luke had sent without saying how he got them. Veronica said to preserve everything and make multiple copies because the pool would try to destroy any evidence once they knew we were serious about legal action. She gave me her email and told me to send her everything I had tonight so she could start working on it first thing in the morning. The next day, Veronica worked fast, sending official preservation letters to the pool by certified mail, demanding they maintain all records, videos, and chemical logs from the past year. She filed an emergency motion with the court to prevent them from doing any maintenance repairs or cleaning that could destroy evidence of what happened to Satie. The pool's attorney responded within hours, trying to claim the letters were harassment, but Veronica shot back with citations about evidence preservation in cases involving child injuries. She also started preparing a civil lawsuit naming both the pool and Malik personally as defendants seeking damages for Satie's medical bills, pain and suffering, and future care needs. That same morning, Glenn Vasquez called my cell saying he was a reporter with the local paper, and he'd heard about an incident at the community pool involving a special needs child. He wanted to investigate, but understood if I wanted to protect Satie's privacy, and offered to speak off the record first to see if this was something bigger. I was torn between wanting the whole world to know what Malik did and keeping Satie out of the spotlight while she recovered. I agreed to meet him, but only to talk generally about pool safety without using Satie's name or specific details about her injuries. 2 days later, Malik showed up at the police station with his own story, claiming 3 masked men had broken into his apartment in the middle of the night and threatened him. He couldn't explain the bruises on his wrists where the zip ties had been, but insisted he was the victim of a vigilante attack. His cousin, the captain, immediately assigned the case to himself, which meant Malik was trying to flip everything around and make himself the victim instead of the criminal. The captain started calling other parents asking if they knew anything about threats against his nephew, and warning them about dangerous vigilantes targeting swim instructors. That afternoon, Lena called saying Ahmed Brennan, who worked maintenance at the pool, had reached out to her privately with information about the alarm system. He was scared of losing his job since he had 2 kids to support, but couldn't stay quiet anymore about what he'd seen and knew about Malik's behavior. Ahmed had noticed the alarm system was mysteriously disabled the week before Satie's incident, and he thought it was connected to whatever Malik had been doing in that equipment room. He wanted to help, but needed assurance that someone would protect him from retaliation if he came forward with what he knew about the pool's operations. Lena gave me his number and said he'd only talk if we met somewhere away from the pool where nobody would see us together. I called Ahmed, and we agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town the next morning before his shift started. When I got there, he was already waiting in a back corner booth with a manila folder on the table and his hands wrapped around a coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. He looked around nervously before sliding the folder across to me, explaining that Malik had him disconnect certain cameras months ago, claiming they were broken and needed replacement. Inside were work orders with Malik's signature specifically requesting that cameras be removed from the hallway outside the equipment room and the back entrance to the pool area. Ahmed had kept copies of everything because something felt wrong about disabling security equipment in areas where kids were present. He also had timestamps showing when each camera went offline, creating blind spots that would let someone move through those areas without being recorded. I grabbed the folder and thanked Ahmed before driving straight to Veronica's office downtown. She was in a meeting, but her assistant saw my face and got her immediately. Veronica spread the work orders across her desk, and her eyes went wide as she traced the dates with her finger. She made copies right there and had her assistant scan everything while she called Glenn on speaker to tell him what we had. Within an hour, she'd filed it all with the court as evidence of premeditation and sent the originals to Glenn for his investigation. She kept saying this changed everything because it proved Malik planned those blind spots months before Satie got hurt. That evening, my phone rang while I was back at the hospital with Satie. It was Joanna calling from her office with news about the insurance appeal. They'd approved partial coverage for the surgery, which was good, but we were still looking at $30,000 in bills that weren't covered. She said she was already working with the hospital's charity program and had meetings set up with 3 different foundations that helped families with medical costs. Her voice stayed positive as she explained the paperwork she needed from me and promised she'd handle most of it herself. 2 days later, Glenn's article hit the front page of the local paper with the headline about safety concerns at community pools. He didn't mention Satie's name or give specific details about her injuries, but he laid out the pattern of complaints and the disabled cameras. My phone started ringing within minutes of the online version going up. The city announced an emergency inspection of all pool facilities before lunch, and suddenly every parent in town was talking about it. The pool closed that afternoon with a sign saying it was for maintenance, but everyone knew the real reason. Their lawyer sent Veronica a letter the next morning offering $25,000 if we signed an NDA and agreed not to pursue further action. Veronica actually laughed when she read it to me over the phone and said their panic was showing because innocent places don't offer money to make things go away. She wrote back that we weren't interested in anything less than full accountability for what happened to Satie and every other child Malik hurt. My phone didn't stop ringing after Glenn's article came out. 3 different parents called me that first day saying their kids had also been taken for private sessions with Malik. One mother couldn't stop crying as she told me her 6-year-old son won't even take baths anymore and screams when she tries to wash his hair. Another parent said their daughter used to love swimming, but now she has panic attacks just walking past the pool. The third parent's child had started wetting the bed again after being potty trained for 2 years. All of them said Malik told them their kids needed special one-on-one attention to improve their swimming skills. I gave them all Veronica's number and told them we were building a case together. The next morning, I went back to the police station to file a formal complaint about the captain's conflict of interest in protecting his cousin. The desk sergeant looked uncomfortable but took my complaint and said someone would be in touch. 3 hours later, I got a call from Detective Ronan Osborne who said he'd been assigned to our case. He sounded young but eager and asked if we could meet that afternoon to go over everything from the beginning. When I met him at a coffee shop near the hospital, he actually took notes and asked real questions instead of dismissing me. He wanted to know every detail about the grip marks on Satie's wrists and ankles and asked for copies of all the medical photos. I gave him Ahmed's contact information and explained about the disabled cameras and the work orders. Osborne called Ahmed right there and set up an official interview for the next day. He promised to record everything properly and said this gave him probable cause to get a warrant to search the equipment room at the pool. He also mentioned that Internal Affairs was now looking into the captain's handling of abuse cases involving his family members. Ahmed went to the station the next morning and gave his statement with Osborne recording everything. He brought all his copies of work orders and maintenance logs showing exactly when Malik had requested specific cameras be disabled. Osborne got his warrant approved that afternoon and assembled a team to search the pool properly. Meanwhile, Lena had been busy organizing the other parents from the swim program. She created a private Facebook group where families could share their experiences without fear of judgment. The stories that came out were all so similar it made me sick. Kids being taken alone to the equipment room for special training. Children coming home scared of water when they used to love it. Parents being told their kids were difficult or needed extra help to keep up with the group. Lena coordinated with everyone to give official statements to Osborne, and within 2 days he had 12 different families on record describing the same pattern of isolation and fear. The search of the pool happened early on a Thursday morning. Osborne called me after to describe what they found in that equipment room. There were weighted belts that Malik claimed were for building strength in young swimmers. Restraint devices, he said, were training aids to help kids learn proper form. Buckets with residue of chemicals that weren't approved for pool use. Osborne's team photographed everything and took samples for testing. He told me criminal charges were now almost certain, and the prosecutor was already reviewing the case. The captain tried to show up during the search, claiming he needed to supervise since it involved his district. Osborne had to call his supervisor, who arrived within minutes, and told the captain to leave immediately. Word spread fast through the department that the captain was removed from any cases involving the pool or his cousin. By that afternoon, everyone knew he was under investigation himself for obstruction of justice and abuse of power. 3 days later, I was back at the hospital when Satie tried to speak for the first time since surgery. Her lips moved and this tiny, raspy sound came out that barely sounded like mama, but it was there. Dr. Sumner examined her throat with a scope and said the swelling had gone down enough that speech therapy could start immediately. She scheduled sessions twice a day and showed me exercises to do with Satie between appointments. The therapist worked with Satie using mirrors and special tools to help her relearn how to position her tongue and lips. Each session lasted an hour and left Satie exhausted but determined to keep trying. By the end of the week, she could whisper simple words, though each one seemed to hurt. The next Monday, a social worker from Child Protective Services arrived with special communication boards covered in pictures. She explained they needed to interview Satie about what happened at the pool, even though she couldn't speak well yet. I sat beside Satie, holding her hand, while the social worker asked questions and showed different pictures. Satie pointed to an image of a man holding a child's head underwater and started crying. The social worker documented everything with photos and notes while asking follow-up questions using yes and no cards. Satie kept pointing to the same underwater picture and then to a door being locked. The interview took 2 hours with breaks every 15 minutes, so Satie could rest her throat. The social worker said she'd file her report within 48 hours and it would support criminal charges. That afternoon, Veronica called saying Malik's attorney had reached out about a possible plea deal. He wanted to claim his client had mental health issues that explained his behavior with the kids. Veronica told him to take that offer straight to the prosecutor because we weren't backing down from the civil lawsuit no matter what criminal deal they made. She said accepting mental health as an excuse would let him work with kids again after treatment. 2 weeks passed before the prosecutor finally filed charges against Malik for multiple counts of child endangerment and assault. They couldn't prove attempted murder without more evidence, but the charges were enough to keep him away from kids permanently. I wanted more, but Veronica said these charges carried serious prison time and would require him to register as a child abuser. The arraignment happened on a Thursday morning at the courthouse downtown. I sat in the gallery watching Malik in his orange jumpsuit trying to look small and harmless. The judge read through the charges while reviewing the evidence, including Satie's injuries and the pattern of abuse. When the prosecutor mentioned flight risk due to family connections overseas, the judge set bail at $50,000. Malik's family posted bond that same afternoon, but he had to wear an ankle monitor and stay 500 feet from all pools and schools. The conditions also banned him from any contact with children under 18, including his own nieces and nephews. Meanwhile, Glenn had been digging into the pool's administration and published an article revealing the board knew about complaints against Malik for 2 years. Parents had reported concerns about him isolating kids, but the board dismissed them because Malik was the captain's cousin. The city fired 3 administrators within hours of the article going live and announced a full review of hiring practices. Glenn's investigation showed they'd ignored at least 6 formal complaints and never documented them properly. The grand jury convened the following week, and Ahmed testified about the disabled cameras and altered chemical logs. He brought copies of work orders showing Malik specifically requested certain cameras be turned off for maintenance that never happened. Ahmed risked his job telling the truth, but said he couldn't live with himself if he stayed quiet. Other pool employees started coming forward after Ahmed's testimony, saying they'd noticed strange things but were scared to report them. One lifeguard said Malik threatened to get her fired when she asked about the equipment room. Another maintenance worker confirmed finding unusual chemical residue in buckets Malik kept separate from normal supplies. The grand jury indicted Malik on 12 counts, which meant the criminal case would definitely go to trial. During all this, Joanna had been fighting with insurance companies and finally got through to someone at Medicaid who approved emergency coverage. She spent hours on the phone explaining Satie's case and documenting the abuse aspect, which qualified for special provisions. The hospital charity board approved covering the remaining bills after reviewing our financial situation and the circumstances. The relief of not owing $30,000 meant I could focus on Satie's recovery instead of bankruptcy. Luke and Danny met with Veronica about the recording from that night at Malik's apartment. She'd already talked to the prosecutor about limited immunity if they testified about what Malik confessed. The prosecutor agreed their testimony about Malik admitting to holding kids underwater was worth more than charging them with intimidation. Danny seemed relieved he could help the case without going back to prison. Luke still felt guilty about that night, but Veronica assured him the confession would be crucial for conviction. She had them write out detailed statements about everything Malik said, including his admission about the special breathing exercises. More families started joining our civil lawsuit after Glenn's articles, and the criminal charges became public. Parents whose kids had been in Malik's classes for years came forward with similar stories about private sessions. Veronica filed paperwork, making it a class action lawsuit against the pool and city for negligent supervision. She said the settlement could be substantial enough to cover Satie's therapy and all future medical needs. 12 families had joined within a week, and more kept calling her office. The pool's insurance company was already making settlement offers, but Veronica said we could do much better if we stayed united. 3 days later, Ahmed called me at 6 in the morning saying Malik just drove past the pool and the traffic cameras caught everything. Ahmed had made sure those cameras stayed on after the police started watching the area more closely. I watched the footage on my phone showing Malik's car slowly passing the pool entrance 4 times in 20 minutes. The prosecutor filed an emergency motion that afternoon, and by evening, Malik's bail was revoked. Officers arrested him at his apartment while I watched from across the street with Luke. Malik screamed about his rights as they put him in the patrol car, but the judge had already signed the order. That night, I slept 8 hours straight for the first time since the incident. The next morning, Osborne called to tell me the captain got suspended without pay after Internal Affairs found evidence he'd been protecting Malik for years. They reopened 12 old cases where parents had complained about pool staff, and the captain had closed them without proper investigation. Federal investigators showed up at the station and started pulling files going back a decade. Osborne said they found emails between the captain and Malik discussing how to handle difficult parents. 2 weeks passed before Satie's next speech therapy session, where something amazing happened. She looked right at me and said, "Mama," so clearly that her therapist started crying. We went straight to the ice cream shop where Satie kept signing happy over and over while eating chocolate chip. Her voice was still soft and raspy, but she could form words now. The therapist said her vocal cords were healing faster than expected. I recorded her saying "mama" and "love" and sent it to everyone who'd been supporting us. The pretrial hearing came up faster than expected when Malik's lawyer filed a motion to suppress our recording from that night. We sat in the courtroom while his attorney argued that Malik was in custody and hadn't been read his rights. The prosecutor played the recording and pointed out that Malik wasn't under arrest and had voluntarily confessed. The judge took 10 minutes to decide before ruling the recording was admissible since we weren't law enforcement. Malik's lawyer slumped in his chair, knowing their best defense just disappeared. Veronica called that afternoon saying the pool's insurance company offered $500,000 to split among all 14 families now in the lawsuit. She laughed and said they were terrified of a jury seeing Satie testify, even if just through sign language. We had a meeting with all the families where Veronica explained we could push for much more. Everyone agreed to reject the offer and keep fighting. The insurance company's lawyer looked shocked when Veronica told him we wanted 10 times that amount. 3 days later, Danny got picked up on an old warrant from a bar fight 2 years ago. I panicked thinking we'd lose his testimony, but Veronica worked her magic with the judge. She explained Danny's cooperation in our case and got him weekend jail time so he could still work and testify. Danny hugged me outside the courthouse and said helping Satie gave his life meaning after all his mistakes. He'd been sober 6 months and planned to stay that way. Satie started back at the school the following Monday with a full-time aide named Mrs. Peterson, who knew sign language. Her teacher called me that first day saying Satie kept checking on the younger kids at recess. She'd watch them on the playground and sign safe whenever a teacher was nearby. The aide said Satie seemed determined to protect the little ones. Other kids started learning basic signs to talk with her. Veronica scheduled a meeting to prepare us for trial, which the judge set for 3 months out. She explained how grueling testifying would be and arranged for Satie to give testimony through closed-circuit television. We practiced with Satie using the cameras so she wouldn't be scared when the time came. Malik wouldn't be in the room when she testified, but his lawyer could still ask questions through the prosecutor. Veronica said Satie's testimony would destroy any sympathy the jury might have for Malik. Glenn's investigation won a state journalism award for public service reporting that led to new pool safety laws. At the ceremony, he announced he was donating the $5,000 prize to Satie's speech therapy fund. He told the audience her story changed how the whole state protects vulnerable children. The new laws required cameras in all areas where adults worked alone with kids and mandatory background checks every 6 months. I was pushing my cart through the produce section when Malik's mother appeared in front of me. She grabbed my arm, begging me to show mercy because her son was sick and needed psychiatric help, not prison. Her eyes were red from crying as she said Malik had problems since childhood that she should have addressed. I pulled my arm away and told her Satie needed help too when Malik held her under the chemicals. She kept following me through the store saying prison would kill him. I left my cart and walked out shaking so hard I couldn't drive for 20 minutes. 2 weeks later, Veronica called me with news about the city's settlement offer while I was helping Satie with her speech exercises. The city agreed to pay $200,000 and promised to put cameras in every youth program facility, plus mandatory background checks every 6 months. I signed the papers at her office thinking it wasn't nearly enough money for what happened, but at least the new rules might keep other kids safe. Luke came over that night looking worse than I'd seen him in years. He told me he'd started seeing a therapist because he couldn't stop thinking about what we did to Malik that night in his bathroom. The therapist was helping him work through watching his niece get hurt and not being able to protect her the right way. He'd started going to city council meetings pushing for stronger laws about reporting abuse. The deposition happened 3 weeks after that in a conference room downtown, where Malik sat across from us with his lawyer. He admitted to holding kids underwater, claiming it was special training to make them better swimmers. He kept saying he was helping them build strength and teaching them discipline. His lawyer kept touching his arm, trying to get him to stop talking, but Malik couldn't help himself. He went on about how parents didn't understand his methods, and how the kids needed to be pushed harder. Even his own lawyer looked sick listening to him describe forcing children to hold their breath until they panicked. Veronica recorded everything while I sat there watching this man describe torturing my daughter like it was some kind of accomplishment. The pool filed for bankruptcy the next week, trying to dodge our lawsuit, but Veronica had already frozen their assets and insurance policies months ago. She explained they couldn't just walk away from what they'd done, and the families would get paid even if it took years to sort through all the legal stuff. Satie's voice kept getting stronger every day with her speech therapy. One morning, her teacher called saying Satie wanted to sing at the school talent show next month. We practiced every night with her choosing "You Are My Sunshine" and signing the words while she sang in her soft new voice. The night of the show, I watched from the front row as my baby stood on that stage singing clearly enough for everyone to hear. Parents around me were crying, and even the principal had to wipe his eyes. 3 days before the trial was supposed to start, Malik's lawyer called Veronica saying he wanted to plead guilty. The prosecutor offered him 8 to 12 years with possible parole after 5 if he admitted to everything. It wasn't close to what he deserved for hurting all those kids, but it meant Satie wouldn't have to testify or see him again. I sat in the courtroom watching them take him away in handcuffs after the judge accepted his plea. The captain who protected Malik got indicted on corruption charges 2 weeks later. Internal Affairs found evidence he'd been covering for his cousin for years and blocking investigations. He took a deal to resign and avoid jail time, which made me sick, but at least he couldn't hurt any more families. Osborne got promoted to captain and held a press conference promising to fix how the department handles abuse cases. The insurance company finally agreed to cover all of Satie's medical bills going back to the first day at the hospital. Veronica set up a special needs trust with the settlement money for Satie's future care and therapy. She only charged us a fraction of her normal fees, saying some cases were more important than money, and she was proud to help our family. Ahmed called me crying when the city hired him as their new pool safety inspector, with a big raise and protection as a whistleblower. He thanked me for giving him the courage to speak up and promised he'd spend the rest of his career making sure every kid was safe at every pool in the city. 6 months after everything started, I got a call from Osborne telling me Malik had been attacked in prison. Some inmates found out what he'd done to special needs children and went after him in the shower. He survived but needed surgery to fix his face and would be eating through a straw for months. I hung up feeling nothing but cold satisfaction that he was finally experiencing a fraction of the fear and pain he'd put those kids through. The other families from the pool started meeting for coffee every week to support each other through the legal mess and help our kids heal. Lena organized play dates where the children could be together in safe spaces, while we parents shared resources and made sure nobody felt alone. Danny finished his weekend jail sentence and started volunteering with troubled kids, telling them how helping save Satie changed his whole life. He'd been sober for almost a year and said protecting my daughter gave him a reason to stay clean and be better. Dr. Sumner published a medical paper about treating chemical burns on vocal cords, using Satie's case to teach other doctors how to recognize abuse patterns in burn injuries. She traveled to medical conferences showing the photos and explaining how the grip marks proved this wasn't an accident. The new pool opened with cameras covering every inch of the building and strict rules about adults never being alone with children. 3 weeks after that, a state senator called asking if we'd testify about pool safety laws at the Capitol building. I drove Satie there in my beat-up Honda while she practiced signing her name on every scrap of paper she could find. The hearing room was packed with reporters and other families who'd been hurt by similar situations. The senator read our story into the record while Satie sat next to me coloring in her notebook. They voted right there to create new rules requiring cameras in every room where adults work with kids. The governor scheduled the signing ceremony for the following Tuesday at the Children's Hospital where Satie had her surgeries. When we got there, news crews were setting up everywhere, and the governor was already at the podium talking about protecting vulnerable kids. He called Satie up to hand him the pen for signing. She walked up slowly, still getting used to people staring at her scars, then handed him the pen and said, "For safe kids," into the microphone. Everyone started clapping, and the governor signed it right there, making it official law. Danny showed up at the ceremony wearing a suit I'd never seen him in before. He pulled me aside afterward and told me he'd just finished his last weekend in jail and got hired at a youth center downtown. He was teaching kids about making better choices and using our story as an example of protecting people who can't protect themselves. The director said Danny was the best counselor they'd hired in years because the kids actually listened to him. Lena had been busy too, setting up meetings at the community center for all the families from the pool. We met every Thursday night while the kids played in the next room with volunteers watching them. Parents shared lawyer recommendations, therapy resources, and just listened to each other cry sometimes. The group grew from 5 families to almost 20 within 2 months. Dr. Sumner sent me a copy of the medical journal where she published her paper about treating chemical burns on vocal cords. She used Satie's x-rays and treatment photos to show other doctors what to look for when kids come in with suspicious injuries. Medical schools started inviting her to speak at conferences about recognizing abuse patterns in burn cases. She always carried Satie's before and after photos to show how kids can recover with the right treatment. Luke started picking Satie up from the school every Friday to take her for ice cream. He'd sit through every school play, every therapy appointment, every doctor visit without me even asking. One night he told me that what we did to Malik still keeps him up sometimes, but watching Satie get stronger makes it worth every sleepless night. He installed a doorbell camera at my apartment and taught Satie a special knock so she'd always know it was him. 6 months after everything, the city opened the rebuilt pool with a whole ceremony about their new safety rules. Background checks for every employee, cameras in every room, and parents could watch live feeds on their phones. They hired a trauma specialist who worked with kids who'd been through abuse. Satie saw the flyers at the school and asked if she could try swimming again. I signed her up even though my hands shook filling out the forms. Her first day back at a pool, she grabbed my hand so tight her knuckles went white. The new instructor, a woman with gray hair and the softest voice, let Satie sit on the edge, just putting her feet in for the whole first lesson. Week by week, Satie went deeper, first sitting on the steps, then standing in the shallow end, then letting the instructor hold her while she floated. 2 months in, I was watching through the window when Satie started kicking across the pool with a kickboard. She looked right at me through the glass and signed brave, with the biggest smile I'd seen since before everything happened. The instructor said Satie was her bravest student and asked if she could use her story to help other kids who were scared of water. Fast forward to last month, exactly 1 year after the chemical burns. Satie's school was having their spring talent show, and she signed up without telling me. I sat in the auditorium with Luke, Danny, Lena, and half our support group, having no idea what she planned to do. The curtain opened, and there was my baby girl standing at the microphone in her favorite purple dress. She started telling knock-knock jokes, her voice clear and strong, making the whole auditorium laugh at her silly puns about swimming and being brave. When she finished, she signed "I love you" to me from the stage while everyone gave her a standing ovation. The principal said it was the best act they'd ever had because Satie showed everyone that being different and having scars didn't mean you couldn't be funny and confident. That night, tucking her in, Satie asked if we were stronger now than before the bad man hurt her, and all I could do was nod because my throat was too tight to speak. Thanks for letting me wonder and explore alongside you today. It's been such a fascinating journey. Until we meet again, friend. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.